In 1985, I wrote up an account of how I'd found John Bodfish's parentage for the magazine of the Northamptonshire County History Society. Then, 10 years later, I was contacted by a lady from New Zealand named Beverly Jackson, telling me she'd found this article, was most excited to discover that it was about her forebears too. Sarah and Robert Austin were her three great-grandparents. Beverly is descended from Sarah's Austin's granddaughter Emma, who went to New Zealand in 1874. One of Emma's sons visited England in 1926, and before he went, Emma dictated to him her life story. Beverly sent this life story to me, and a remarkable story it is, and I will give it to you, most of it in Emma's own words. Firstly, though, we need to look at Emma's origins. Robert and Sarah Austin's fifth child was a daughter named Sarah. She was baptised at Tadmarton in 1826. Then, as was usual for so many country girls, and indeed just as her mother Sarah had been, when she was about 12 or 13 years of age, Sarah Austin Jr. was sent off into service. I found that in 1841 she was aged 14 and living in as a servant in the house of a draper on the High Street in Banbury. Census of 1851 described as formerly housemaid. Sarah's back living with her parents again at Tadmont. Perhaps she was between jobs, maybe she'd been ill and had come back to her mother's care for a time. About 3 months after that census was taken, Sarah Jr. became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter, whom she named Emma Bleak Austin. Born on the 4th of March 1852 at Tadmarton, baptised there subsequently. Again, birth certificate with no name and surname of father, no occupation of father. I tried very hard to find a Mr. Bleak or Blake that I could pin this onto, but without any success. But 7 months after the birth of young Emma, on the 4th of October 1852 at Tadmarton, Sarah Jr. married her cousin, William Bodfish, a labourer. At the end of the following year, they had a son, Henry, always known as Harry. In about 1855, Sarah and William and their children, and William's parents, and my great-great-grandfather John Bodfish and his wife and family, all of them left Tadmarton and made their way up to Birmingham. Farming was undergoing a terrible slump in the mid-1850s. They must have thought they might have a better future in the growing industrial town. And now we come to Emma's own account of her early life. My mother died when I was about 6.5 years old. At that time, we lived in Mosley Street, Birmingham, and she was buried in St. Bartholomew's churchyard, and her baby, Jane, was buried with her. After her death, which I can just remember, I was left to run the streets for some time. Then my grandmother sent for me, and I had a yellow ticket pinned on my shoulder, and I was put on the train at Birmingham. My half-brother, Harry Bodfish, was left with his father, who was a bellows maker by trade, with very poor wages and a very poor home. My grandmother met me at the station in Banbury and took me to Tadmartin in the carrier's cart, and I lived there with my grandparents. They lived in the same stone house for about 40 years, from the time they were married until they died. The cottage was old and thatched, and the windows had diamond-shaped glass. It was situated down a lane near the gate of the Church of England. A public house was on the corner of the lane. My grandfather had 11 children, sons and daughters, were all born at the same old cottage. Sometimes I was taken by my grandfather to Tadmartin Heath. He had a few sections rented there and grew wheat, carrots and rye. I helped with the ploughing. We had a pony, which I was very fond of. I used always to be there at haymaking time. I remember receiving my wages, 1 shilling and 6pence for the hay time. Poor grandmother used to fret about my mother. Well, I decided I would send for the death certificate to see what had become of Emma's mother, Sarah. And this is it. I can remember my uncle, John Bodfish, who used to live at Ladywell Walk, Birmingham. Of course, this John Bodfish, her uncle, is my great-great-grandfather. I remember him saying that she died from want of proper nourishment. In fact, the certificate says chronic bronchitis. She was 30 years of age. Grandmother loved her very much and hoped to be a mother to me. But the poor thing had a stroke soon after I went to live with her. She was partly paralysed, and I had always to be near her to do what I could to help her. I could not go to school because I could not be spared. So I was taught to read at night time. Grandmother used to read the scriptures to me. Also, Pilgrim's Progress, which I was very fond of. So my girlhood soon passed. I do find it very touching to think of that scene. Grandmother Sarah passing on to her much-loved granddaughter the benefit of the learning she'd had at that Sunday school. Now, this was 10 years before compulsory education, and the fact later that young Emma could read must have stood her in good stead, obtained better employment for her than would be available to most poor girls left to run the streets as children. Well, Sarah goes on. She says, I was about 11 years old when they got permission for me to attend Swaycliffe Church School by paying 2pence per week. That was in the next village to Tadmartin, about a mile distant. I liked school very much, but had only attended for a few months when my grandmother had another stroke, and that was the end of my school days. She died on the 13th of June, 1865, and my grandfather took it so badly that he died about 8 weeks afterwards. Sarah was buried on the 14th of June, 1865. She was 68. Robert on the 9th of August, and he was 72. So, what is to become of young Emma? She says, then my Aunt Jane came from Towcester, where she had gone to live when she was married. Now, this Aunt Jane was the youngest of Robert and Sarah's children, and she's now a Mrs. Cooper. She promised to look after me, and I was supposed to live with her, but I was put out to service. Now, Emma would have been 13, and this was about the age when those young country girls first got sent out into service. I was to learn to be a housemaid for the family my aunt used to work for before she was married. I did not like living with them because they treated me like a slave. So one Sunday morning, when they'd all gone to church, I tied up my few clothes and got out of the back gate and went to my aunt's. My aunt was very angry with me, but I told her I would never go back to the place. I was to have been paid 1 shilling and 6pence per week. I'd been there about 3 months and I'd had no money. Then I got a situation in Northampton with a Miss Acklin, and that was quite a different place. They taught me to sew and to read on Sundays. I stayed there about a year. Then my aunt's husband, my uncle, went to work on the Great North Western Railway in Kentish Town, London. I left my place and made my way to my aunt's in London. But oh, what a home to go to! It was one room, up a flight of back stairs behind a shop. There were 5 of us to eat, sleep, and live in that small place. I got a situation in Kentish Town where I was going to be a housemaid to a lady. But I found that the lady liked her gin, and I objected to being sent to the pub for it. She used to leave me all day sometimes to do so much work while she was out, but she locked up all the food. I told her one day I would tell my aunt if she did not give me my wages and more food. She would not. So, although the snow was on the ground, I would not stay any longer. She went to lock one door to keep me in, but I got out through another and ran up the area steps, and when I got to the street, I felt quite free. But I had no clothes, only those I had on, and no money. My aunt was very angry, of course, but so was I. I told a policeman about my position when I cleared out in the snowstorm. He told me to summons the old lady. That I did, which cost me 1 shilling. I attended the case at Bloomsbury County Court, and she got such a lecture because I was an orphan and there was protection for such, though I did not know it at the time. She had to pay me my wages and 6 shillings expenses and deliver up my clothes that day. I then got a position in Kingston for about 3 years with a good family. I was nurse to 2 little boys. And there she is on the 1871 census, right at the bottom, in service in the household of a corn factor in London. I had a very good time and learned many things. My wages rose until I was getting top wages, £14 per year. My aunt, meanwhile, had moved to Pottersbury in Northamptonshire. Well, what a coincidence, I thought. I doubt very much if Mrs. Jane Cooper knew that one of the old men then in the village of Pottersbury was John Meakins, the father of her half-brother. Emma continues, I decided to take a holiday to go to see her. When I arrived at Pottersbury, I was still disappointed in her home. Everything was so different, and it's no appeal for me after living in the good homes where I'd been in service. So I took another situation up to a place about 10 miles away. The evening I left my aunt's house, a young man called to return a book he'd borrowed. I spoke to him for just a few minutes, and then he left, and so did I, to go to my new situation. When I'd been there for a short while, this same young man, whose name was Thomas Payne Judkins, came to a village nearby to preach at the Methodist church. I got leave to go and hear him. The little church was full. And I felt very shy amongst strangers, especially as when I entered, the young man came from the pulpit and gave me his book. I think that it was love at first sight on his part. I then had a desire to go to Birmingham to find my half-brother, Harry Bodfish. I was then about 18 and I'd not seen him since childhood. T.P. Judkins, after this she refers to this man as T.P. T.P. Judkins, who was in the boot trade, completed his 6 years apprenticeship before I left. Now, boot and shoemaking, one of the principal trades of that part of Northamptonshire. He tried to get work at Northampton, walking the 8 miles there, but the trade was in a deplorable condition. After many tries to get along, T.P. decided, like many others, to try Birmingham. His efforts were unsuccessful, though, and he had to give up and return to his parents' home at Wood Burcote. Meanwhile, I had gone to Birmingham. My stepfather had remarried, and my stepmother was a dressmaker. She would have liked me to make my home with them, but I got a situation which was much better for me financially. I went to be a housemaid with a Mr. J.S. Wright, who lived in a big house in Handsworth. I traced Emma's employer through the trade directories. He was John Skirrow Wright, a button manufacturer, and button making was one of the big industries of Birmingham. It was while I was in his service that I heard a good deal about emigration, and that decided our future. There was no hope of a future in England such as the one I craved. We decided to get married, and I told the lady of the house where I worked my intentions. She seemed very pleased, and she helped me all she could. She said, "Be sure and tell the young man to take all his tools with him." That would have been the kind of family with which Emma was now working. I left my situation and went to T.P.'s home at Wood Burcote near Towcester, where his mother received me very kindly, and I stayed there until our wedding day on the 14th of July, 1874 it was. It was lovely and fine. We were quietly married at the old Baptist church, and we departed for New Zealand soon afterwards. Mrs. Wright had given me some new clothing for my outfit for the voyage, and I still have a quantity of the buttons the Wrights gave me from their factory. We were full of hope, trusting God to guide us for the future. We were very pleased to receive the £2 from the Farm Labourers Union. The money did not last long, as we had to pay our fare to London, and we spent our last 2 shillings and 6pence on a tin of biscuits at Gravesend. Then we possessed 2 farthings, all the money we had. There were 419 people on the ship, the Assay, and we left Gravesend on the 1st of September, 1874. The voyage took about 4 months, and after some weeks, people's boots were beginning to wear out. T.P. was asked if he could do some repairs, so he asked permission to have his tools out once a week, and by that means he earned many a shilling. I earned some money by sewing and cooking for those who were sick. By the time we arrived in Auckland, we had about £6, 17 shillings, which for us was a small fortune. We arrived in Auckland Harbour on Christmas Day. But owing to health inspections and other formalities, we did not land until the 28th of December. It was a lovely fine day. We were all taken to the barracks. We stayed there a week. Then we each got a job and made a new start in life. We were always glad that we came to this grand country, for there did not seem to be any of the poverty here that I'd seen in England. In conclusion, Emma and TP had 6 sons and 3 daughters, and the family eventually settled in Christchurch. Her stepfather died a year after she emigrated, and although she never saw him again, Emma kept in touch with that half-brother Harry in Birmingham until his death in 1931. T.P. Judkins died in 1920, and Emma outlived him by 30 years, dying in 1950 at the age of 98. So, why is this talk called The Cottage by the Well? Apparently, in 1962, another of the Judkins family came to Tadmartin armed with an extra scrap of information from Emma, that the Austins' home had a well in front of it under a step. Now, whoever that was who came, I don't know, but they came to Tadmartin and they photographed the rear view of the old houses. And this picture was amongst the copies of pictures that Beverly Jackson sent to me in 1995. Now, I have visited Tadmartin a few times since I first went there to visit and thank good Dr. Arendt, who gave me so much help at the outset. You see, I recognised what Emma had said about this Austin family home being situated down a lane near the gate of the Church of England with a public house on the corner. This was the picture of the front of the cottage, and the well was beneath the step. So, it'd be about 1997, off I went to Tadmartin to see if I could find the cottage for myself. There's the main road through Tadmartin, and there is the public house. Stood on the corner, I knew I'd got to go down that lane. So, down I went. The lane turns sharply at right angles and then peters out. This is the view. Suddenly, at the end cottage there, I could see a step across an opening with the well beneath it. This was the Austins' cottage, where Robert and Sarah had raised their children and given little Emma a home as well, between 1817 and 1864, the marriage span of Robert and Sarah. So, of course, I asked the friend who was with me to take a picture of me in front of it. Our proceedings did not go unwitnessed, though, and the owner of the cottage popped his head out and asked, pleasantly, why a photograph of this particular house? And when I explained, he and his wife could not have been more friendly. He was Mr. David Abrams, who was a consultant eye surgeon at Moorfields Hospital in London, and the cottage was their weekend retreat. They invited us in, sat us down to tea. I took this picture of the hearth. That would be the one feature that would still be relatively unchanged from when the Austins lived there. They were delighted with what I could tell them about the Austin family living there those dates. I went back again to see it once more in 2021. A lot of the shrubbery has grown up around there since. But the well, yes, that is still there. So I do hope you've enjoyed hearing about what I've been able to trace of the lives of Sarah Bodfish, her daughter Sarah Austin Jr., and granddaughter Emma Bleak Bodfish. Their lives, like the lives of most of our ancestors, were lives of hard work, struggle, and few comforts. We've seen that these were 3 lives where mistakes were made, trouble and sorrow had to be survived. But in Emma's case, winning through to security and happiness. Thank you all for coming out this evening. Thanks for being my audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it wasn't quite what we were expecting, but I'm still absolutely superb. Thank you very much, Mary. And then you've got another booking to make, haven't you?
Absolutely. I'll be back in touch, Mary, and rebook you for next year.
It truly is always a pleasure to come out to you at Burnswood, and an especial pleasure to talk to a group such as yourselves who are with me in the process of research. I think it makes a more interesting story than just giving out the life stories, except in Emma's case, where so unusually it's told in her own words. It's not a case of reconstructing it from the facts I've discovered, but she tells it like it was. And it's wonderful to be able to conclude on such a positive note with the outcome for her after what she went through as a young girl.